What is a little known but obvious fact that will make all of us feel amazed? Story 1. Your pee is filtered out of your blood by your kidneys. There's no direct route for that glass of water from swallow to kidneys to pee, like food poo has its own set of pipes, from in to out. Water goes into your blood circulation, absorbed through the gut, and at some point gets lifted by your kidneys, along with other waste products, via your blood. It sounds breathtakingly obvious to many of you, but I teach AP as part of my job, and many people don't initially realize that. They assume that there's some separate tube that takes fluids direct to the kidneys because they've just never really thought about it. Story 2. Etymology fact. In Arabic, when it comes to war, you'd have military ranks like Amir al-Bahr, which would roughly translate to ruler of the sea. The term was taken by Latin, shortened to Amir al, and made its way to Western languages as admiral, which means that admiral essentially means lord of the. Story 3. Plumbing comes from the root Latin word of plumbum, which means lead, and is the reason it's PB on the periodic table, because the Romans made water pipes out of lead. As an aside, they knew it was a problem for brains, but they just didn't care, as it mostly affected the pores. Story 4. The term bug in computing has been around a long time. The term was not commonly used until an actual bug landed on an electrical switch, causing the computer to malfunction, returning a 0 when it was supposed to be a 1. The term bug grew in popularity afterwards and landed us where we are today. When we find a bug in software, we apply a patch. This comes from old card expunge card systems. If a punch card was punched in the wrong spot, you could fix it by applying a patch to the hole. Answer. Here's some trivia for the geeks out there that are old enough to remember Commodore 64, but not old enough to ever have used punch cards. It took me years and years before I realized that a punch card holds a line of text, 80 characters long. For some reason, I just didn't understand how punch cards worked. Was it somehow encoded? Did you have to write everything in bytes? No. Punch cards are a line of ASCII plain text, which can be used to program Fortran, COBOL, BASIC, etc. Edit. Each column represented one character. Early on, there were just 2 holes. Then in 1964, IBM extended the character set with a new standard called EBCDIC, which used up to 6 holes per column. When you program, you would create a punch card for each line of your code. If you had a bug in a line of code, you'd fix it by repunching a card and slotting it into the deck of cards which your program was stored. Code reuse was taking some cards from one program and adding it to another. For data entry, those 80 characters could be used for a line of text, field of information, numbers, etc. If you need to update someone's bank account info, for example, you'd create a new card. If you've used a modern code editor that has a line at 80 characters, it goes back to punch cards. Ever wonder what a line editor like Ed works like it does? It seems almost useless. It comes from back in the day when you didn't have a screen, just a paper printout at a terminal. So if you listed your program, it would print it on paper. If you needed to fix a line, you'd use the ed command and fix that one line. You simply referred back to the printed paper until you had changed so many lines that you needed to print a fresh version. You know how BASIC worked, where you had to edit a single line at a time? This is because when it was created, most people used it via print terminals. Story 5. Some things are acronyms that people might not know are acronyms. Laser, light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. Scuba, self-contained underwater breathing apparatus. Radar, radio detection and ranging. Taser, Thomas A. Swift electric rifle. Care package. Care packages were originally known as KRE packages, and they were sent from the U.S. to loved ones via the Cooperative for American Remittances to Europe following the Second World War. The group eventually changed its name to Cooperative for Assistance and Relief Everywhere as they began to broaden out their charitable reach. The term care package slipped into common parlance, and it's been there ever since. Story 6. When you deploy your parachute while skydiving, you do not get pulled back up in altitude. Most modern-day sport parachutes take anywhere from 600 to 1,000 feet to fully open. This is a common misconception due to media where the perspective is from someone who remains in freefall after their subject has deployed their parachute. Also, when you initially jump out of a plane, you do not get the stomach drop sensation that you do on roller coasters. Due to the plane's speed upon exiting, the sensation is closer to that of sticking your arm out of your car window on the highway. It's a feeling of pressure and feels more like what you'd imagine human flight to feel like if we were capable of it. Finally, many people say that they could never skydive due to a fear of heights. But as crazy as it may sound, that fear is very common amongst skydivers. Due to the height at which we jump from, your perspective of heights completely changes, and the ground rush effect doesn't happen until you are lower to the ground than you are when deploying your parachute at the proper recommended altitude. Edit. Spelling grammar. Answer. That leads into another fact. Roller coasters purposely produce slightly negative Gs to give you that hang time sensation. 0 Gs wouldn't be as thrilling when you're strapped into the ride car. Even the old Hollywood roller coasters produce slightly negative Gs, even though from the rider's perspective, it doesn't look like the tracks have the capability to hold the cars on the tracks at negative Gs, but they do. The tall tower rides that drop riders straight down to give the sensation of falling works by accelerating the riders downward faster than gravity alone. The downward assist isn't obvious to the riders when the drop happens, but it's present. Story 7. Copy-paste is from using typewriters, and people would cover a typo with a little pasted square of paper with the correct word. CC in email stands for carbon copy, which was when a piece of mail had to be seen by multiple recipients, usually in business. You would create carbon copy prints of your mail and send them to everyone, plus the primary recipient. We took all the lingo from old communication and just added it to digital communication. Story 8. You cannot shock a person who has flatlined, asystole, heart rhythm back to life as seen on TV. Only effective treatments are chest compressions, epinephrine given intravenously, and luck, which results in about 2 survival rate. Most of the time, flatline occurs about 30 minutes after someone has died, as chaotic, unorganized heart rhythms with electrical activity still occur, and only some are shockable or using pacing method with a defibrillator. Bonus. No. You can't cut a wire from something plugged into a wall like a lamp and shock someone back to life either. Story 9. Not sure about the obvious part, but asteroids in the asteroid belt aren't all hanging out closely, as is shown in practically every sci-fi movie. There's a lot of asteroids, but space is gigantically empty. The average distance between asteroids is 600,000 miles. And when they cross orbits, they cross at high speeds. In the same style, if you are close to a nebula, it won't look like a dense cloud. You wouldn't even realize you are inside a nebula. Again, space is gigantically empty. Story 10. Assuming you are 20 years old and live to be 100, and this is a fantasy world, make 1 meter for the rest of your life, you'll make 80 millions. You'd only need to live 920 more years to get to your first billion. The money worth held by billionaires isn't earned. It's stolen from workers by failing to share generated wealth. Story 11. This one is a little gross, but blew my mind. Self-care is widespread in the animal kingdom. I guess it surprised me so much since I'm quite into animal behavior as a layman, but assumed that the human and human divide was much stronger here. Unlike other types of the disorder, seasonal depression can effectively be treated by vitamin D supplementation and light therapy. Be sure to get a medically certified lamp, and don't take more vitamins than the daily dose allowance. The reason for this is as simple as less daylight hitting the eyes, less serotonin, more depressive symptoms when a hefty dip occurs. You should, of course, talk to a healthcare provider if you're very depressed, but these two can be highly effective for the average winter blues or winter sluggishness. Story 12. To remove ice from a tray, just hold both short ends and twist to loosen ice. I thought this was quite obvious until I caught my mother and brother on 2 separate occasions trying to remove ice with a knife. They thought I was a genius when I showed them how to do it properly. Story 13. All your experiences are happening in your brain, and your brain lives in your skull. You feel like you're outside in the world, but in reality, your brain has always been locked away in darkness. The thing with which we experience the world has never experienced the world. Arguably, you have never touched the real world. We are all brains in jars. Story 14. Earth is the only known location in the universe that supports fire at the surface. Oxygen is highly chemically reactive, and only the abundant life in Earth provides and maintains levels of free oxygen atoms, eager to get violently hot with a good portion of the table of elements. Story 15. The little triangle beside the image of the gas pump on your car's dash points toward the side your gas door is on. Super handy for rentals and borrowed cars, or new ones. We have 2 vehicles and the gas door is on opposite sides, so I always check that. I didn't know that till I was in my 30s, haha. Story 16. Minutes as a measure of time came out of the need to measure smaller periods of time than 1 hour. Minute itself comes from minute, as in small, diminuto in Spanish. Then there was a need to measure even smaller increments of time. They divided the minute into 60 equal, soft, second minutes, or seconds for short. Story 17. This one broke my heart a little bit. All those amazing, bright, colorful photos of space mostly only look like that because the photos were altered. The colors are added to represent different spectrums of light, etc., that we can't see with the naked eye. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's the basic gist of it. Story 18. Mikey, the kid who liked Life cereal, is still alive. His name is John Gilchrist. He's 56 years old as of 2024, and since 2011, he's been the director of media sales for the MSG cable network. And if you drink Coca-Cola after eating Pop Rocks, you'll just burp loudly. Story 19. The only reason we associate diamonds with engagements is because of marketing. De Beers was sitting on a pile of diamonds in the early part of the 20th century and couldn't figure out how to get rid of them. So they invented the idea that proposing marriage had to involve a diamond ring. Story 20. This one isn't obvious, but I still find it cool. Sperm whales are called sperm whales because of the stuff in their heads. Those humongous noggins hold a substance called spermaceti, which help with their buoyancy when diving. It's called spermaceti because when it was first discovered, they thought it was sperm. Don't ask me how they thought sperm was stored in their heads, LMFAO. Spermaceti was used for so many things. Candles, lubricant, other stuff that I can't remember. Whaling was a huge problem for all species and wiped out the populations almost to extinction. Whaling is now banned, but populations are still trying to recover. Story 21. Whether a or an comes before words starting with an H is frequently mistaught. It follows the same pattern as other words, using a for consonant sounds and an for vowel sounds. The special rules about H come from misapplying those rules to different accents. So Americans who pronounce the H in hospital but not in herb say a hospital and herb, a hospital and herb. But British people who pronounce the H in herb but not in hospital say an hospital, a herb, an hospital, a herb. Both are correct. Edit, not all British. Story 22. After birth, you will still look pregnant for months. The uterus takes at least 6 weeks to deflate down close to its pre-pregnancy size, over time going from the size of about a watermelon to an orange. I'm always shocked that in movies, TV shows, etc., the mom has a baby and then immediately goes to a flat stomach right after leaving the hospital. Story 23. The saying, raining cats' dogs, is over 500 years old. From when we lived in mud houses with thatch roofs, the local cats' dogs would live up in the thatch roofs for protection against the elements. So when it rained really hard, the kittens, pups, would fall from ceiling. Thus, it's raining cats' dogs. Story 24. So, for non-Americans, like myself, apparently it's not common knowledge, at least to my Australian friends, that Alaska isn't a part of Canada and is actually the USA. My coworker is planning a trip to Canada and Alaska, but didn't know that Alaska is actually the US. When she told me this, I thought she was kidding. I knew that. She asked some other coworkers and most didn't know. Even one who was also going to Canada in a few years. He thought Alaska was Canada. Story 25. A lot of what constitutes Christianity's views on things like Satan, angels, hell, etc., came centuries after the Bible was compiled from things like art and poetry. Examples. In the Bible, Satan is never described as an angel or as having been once pure and then falling. He's never a ruler of hell, though hell was prepared for him as punishment. Nor is he ever called or equated with Lucifer, which was a name used to mock a human king. Satan is said to have angels of his own that did rebel, though these are never described as demons, which seem to be non-corporeal creatures who must possess in order to have a body unlike angels, which angels are never described as having wings, and those creatures that are described with wings, cherubim, seraphim, are never called angels. Indeed, every instance in the Bible where an angel is called an angel, there's nothing differentiating them from the appearance of human men. Cherubim are described as fearsome warriors, not cute little baby Cupid things. Answer. Isaiah 14:12-15. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations. For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation, in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. Ezekiel 28:12-17. Son of man, take up a lamentation upon the king of Tyrus, and say unto him, Thus saith the Lord God, Thou sealest up the sum, full of wisdom, and perfect in beauty. Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was thy covering. Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth, and I have set thee so. Thou wast upon the holy mountain of God. Thou hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. By the multitude of thy merchandise they have filled the midst of thee with violence, and thou hast sinned. Therefore I will cast thee as profane out of the mountain of God, and I will destroy thee, O covering cherub, from the midst of the stones of fire. Luke 10:18. And he said unto them, I beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven. Revelation 12:7-9. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought in his angels, and prevailed not. Neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. 2 Corinthians 11:14. And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. Story 26. In sailing time to determine your speed, you would throw a log of the back of the boat attached to a knotted rope. You would determine your speed as to how many knots you were going. This speed was tracked in the logbook, or log, and became the term for any written record, like a blog or vlog. Story 27. What a word means and what it refers to are often two separate things. This is part of the basis of social constructionism. A word like American has a few literal meanings, but how Ted Cruz, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, or Tucker Carlson use the word in their discourse determines the meaning of the word. Similarly, God has a few literal meanings too, but how it's used by someone like Pat Robertson versus Martin Luther King determines the meaning of the word, of the concept. Story 28. Those garbage trucks you see picking up both bins, landfill and recycling, are actually split trucks. There are two compartments inside, and the driver switches between the two from the truck cabin. All your recycling is not going to landfill. The recycling is taken to the recycling depot, and the remaining garbage goes to landfill. Story 29. Here's one that might make you chuckle. The symbol, commonly used in email addresses and social media handles, was actually used in accounting long before the digital age. It's a fact that's surprisingly obvious once you know it. In accounting, the symbol was used to mean at the rate of. For example, 10 widgets, 5 each, means 10 widgets at a rate of 5 each. It's a little historical tidbit that feels obvious once you hear it, but might make you go, wait, really? Story 30. Light, in vacuum, is never bent. If it were, it would have to emit something at right angles to satisfy conservation of momentum. It's space that's curved. Light travels in a straight path in a curved space, always. Oh, and from the POV of light, the instant of emission and when it gets somewhere are the same, and all distances are zero. Story 31. Aussie here. Dunno if this works at other servos in other countries. So I saw this on a TikTok. LOL. But it actually works. When you pull up to the servo and get your petrol, what you do is use the inside of the cap where the handle is and let the handle go, and it fills itself so you don't have to hold it. Randomic, but it works. Story 32. Scientists have discovered almost everything, but we still don't know why everything happened. We know how it happened, but not why. Like, why do those things do that? Oh, it's because of how they are structured. But why are they structured like that? We will never know everything. We probably know the bare minimum, and I'm fine with that. Story 33. You don't feel temperature. What you feel is heat transfer. Feeling of cold is body heat leaving at a fast rate. Feeling hot is body heat not leaving quickly. This is apparent when you touch two objects that have been in the same room for a while, and therefore are both the same temperature. A metal object sucks heat out, so it feels cold. But wood at the same temperature doesn't feel hot or cold, because not much heat is being transferred either way. Story 34. If you smell chlorine at a swimming pool or get halo eyes because people peed in the pool, the pee bonds with the chlorine and makes chloramines. Pools are free chlorine residuals, meaning they are not intentionally bonding the chlorine with ammonias. The most likely source for ammonias is pee. Story 35. The wings of the morpho butterfly aren't actually blue. They have microscopic structures that reflect only the blue wavelengths of light. Lexus used this principle to create structural blue paint for 300 special versions of their LC car. It has no blue pigment. It's all because of how the crystals in the paint reflect light. Story 36. The World Wide Web and the Internet are two different things. The WWW made navigating the Internet easier. It's also from 1993, not 2000. The amount of times people say, "We didn't have the Internet in the 90s," boggles my mind, especially when they then mention using things that were the Internet in the 90s. There's a reason that we had so many movies about the Internet and hacking in the 90s. Story 37. The meaning behind the names for the days of the week. Sunday and Monday are named after the celestial bodies, sun and moon, but the other days are named after Norse gods. Tyr's Day, Woden's Day, Thor's Day, and Frigg's Day. Saturday does not follow the same pattern, and the name actually means hot water day, which can be translated as washing day or bathing day. The English Saturday originates from the Roman god Saturn and can be recognized from Latin, where the day is called Dies Saturni. Story 38. When you swallow something, it's still on the outside of our body. Our bodies have a tube running through the middle of it, like a donut. Whatever we eat is contained in our stomach or GI tract, but it still needs to be absorbed to get into our bodies. Human donuts, basically. Story 39. One little known but obvious fact that might make many of us feel a bit foolish is that you don't actually see with your eyes. You see with your brain. Your eyes simply collect light and transmit information to your brain, which then interprets and creates the visual world around you. What you see is your brain's best guess of what's out there, based on the input from your eyes. This is why optical illusions work. They trick the brain, not the eyes. It's so obvious, yet many people don't realize the brain does the heavy lifting in vision. Story 40. As a paleobiologist, people sometimes ask me how dinosaurs could evolve into birds if they were all eliminated by an asteroid. The answer: dinosaurs were not eliminated by the asteroid. The asteroid impact caused major worldwide climate change that resulted in the extinction of all large animals. The smaller animals like bugs, lizards, early mammals, and of course early birds survived the mass extinction. Story 41. Regardless of what you see on literally hundreds hospital dramas about using a defibrillator to shock someone back to life when they have flatlined, it actually is not used for that in the real world. It is used to help reestablish heart rhythms that are too fast, slow, irregular, but not to restart the heart. Story 42. If you have lived to the age of 20 years old, you have achieved something that half of all humans that have ever lived haven't done. This is due to high infant and childhood mortality rates for most of human history, and the fact that a large portion of the human population currently alive is under the age of 20. I'm 23, so yippee. Story 43. Native English speakers know how to order adjectives without even knowing there's a correct order. Try changing around any of the following in the example from Wikipedia. One would say, 1, quantity, nice, opinion, little, size, old, age, round, shape, white, color, brick, material, house. Story 44. Your nose is always in your line of vision, but your brain erases it until you think about it. I have also heard that our brains erase the feeling of our guts organs touching each other. They all have feeling. Why don't we feel them rubbing and squishing around in there? Story 45. Illness symptoms like fevers and muscle aches are not directly called germs. Those symptoms actually come from your own immune system trying to rid your body of disease, whatever it is. Also, your skeleton is always wet until you die. Brushing your teeth is the only time you are cleaning your bones. There is a tremendous amount of data compression as light signals make their way through the front of our eye into and hit the retina, and then that information is sent to the visual processing center, meaning that none of us have actually perceived reality as it truly is. Enjoy knowing those things. Story 46. Late to this thread, but the arrow next to the gas tank symbol on your vehicle's fuel gauge denotes what side of your vehicle the gas nozzle goes in. Can't tell how obvious that is, but I'm embarrassed to admit it took me nearly a decade of driving to figure that one out. Story 47. Anyone who has ever done something new and challenging faces a stage of WTF is going on here. Instead of us realizing that this uncertainty is a fact and is a natural part of the learning process, we allow it to make us feel stupid. When I pass this level, then I'll stop feeling stupid. Story 48. What number of nations have committed at least one war crime? When such question is brought up, the United States, Japan, Germany, both North and South Korea, China, and Russia, just to name a few. However, you'd be surprised on what it takes for one nation to commit one war crime that isn't well known. This is because it's unclear exactly what constitutes a war crime. The majority of what we know about what constitutes a war crime comes from the Geneva Conventions and/or the United Nations. They even have conventions that specify what is appropriate. Since it is deemed torture to leave a wounded target in pain, the majority of them are lenient when it comes to taking a combatant's life. The categories of offenses that qualify as war crimes are getting longer, which is absurd. There are 5 protocols in place at the moment, and a 6th is presumably being developed as a result of weaponized AI. Nonetheless, it is not that difficult to conduct a war crime even in the absence of armed conflict. The temptations that can lead to a country committing crimes against humanity. Consider, for instance, the practices of colonialism and imperialism. Hell, some even criticize them, saying that what their own countries were doing to other countries was wrong. After reading H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds several times, I discovered that it exposed the imperialist practices of the day. Story 49. Words that are spelled the same, but pronounced with emphasis on different syllables, is actually indicative of the part of speech it is. Stress on the first syllable is a noun. Stress on the last syllable is a verb. Examples: contract and contract. The former is a noun, sign this contract, whereas the latter is a verb, the muscles contract. Same with record, address, impact, object, and a few others. Story 50. Everyone has seen shows or movies about traveling circuses, mainly in the 1930s or 1940s. During the Depression, running away to join the circus was a semi-reasonable option. Many people scoff at the Florida law. You must feed the meter where you park your elephant. Those circuses had a travel season that heavily relied on summer and warmer months. They would spend the winter in Florida until the next travel season. AHS even had an entire season about this. Story 51. My favorite thing to tell people. Penguins swim faster than Michael Phelps. Remember that Discovery special that pitted a shark against him to see who was faster? Completely stupid, because even shark food swims faster than he does. Sharks eat penguins, to clarify. Story 52. When extracting organs for donating, doctors need to keep the body alive, obviously through machines, but they need to keep the blood pumping. Edit. Since this blew up, I do want to clarify that, as mentioned in the comments, some organs can be harvested after passing, but main organs like heart and lung need to be receiving oxygen. Story 53. Around 70 of all car accidents happen within 10 miles of your home, because over 70 of your driving is within 10 miles of your home. It's a statistic driving teachers love to toss out there, that most accidents happen close to your home. But if you think about it, most of your driving is close to your home. Even if you drive 20 miles to work, 50 of your driving will take place 10 miles from your home. The average commute is around 15 miles, and most people shop close to home. So it's really common sense that the majority of your driving will take place in that 10-mile radius, even if you travel further for work or other activities. Story 54. When a nurse gives you an IV, they aren't leaving the metal needle inside your arm. They actually remove that and only a soft plastic tube remains, so you don't need to keep your arm that straight. Relax. Edit. Holy shoot. Okay, I'll keep it short and sweet. I am not a doctor. I just listened to Sawbones' podcast, most recent episode, and found out this fact myself. Wow. Thank you so much for the karma and coins. I don't know what to do now. I'm also really happy my most upvoted comment is about something kind of smart and not butts. Thank you, Sydney McElroy, MD. Answer. I have to explain this to patients quite frequently, especially older patients. There was a time when butterfly needles were frequently used for IV access before Insight catheters were made standard, which I believe is the reason most people have this misconception. But despite explaining this, I still see patients that will refuse to bend the arm where their IV is placed. Edit. After reading some of the other replies, I felt like I needed to add to my comment. Above, I was referring to the ones I've encountered who still fear the plastic catheter will shred their vein if they move that site, despite explanation otherwise. But just because these catheters can bend and won't pierce the vein doesn't mean they are comfortable by any means. These can be painful and irritating as hell. Story 55. You know that old statistic that the average person eats 3 spiders in their sleep each year? That was an intentionally made-up statistic by a journalist to elicit the point that people will believe any statistic the media will tell them. Edit. Apparently it's 8 that is commonly told. And apparently, even the origin of this myth itself is ironically not factual. Story 56. The Terminator didn't need a heads-up display in his visual system. His system already had access to all of that information anyway. Otherwise, how could it display it? Redisplaying it in a form that would then have to be visually interpreted would be a complete waste of time. Story 57. You can take a quart-sized Ziploc bag through TSA full of the little travel bottles of liquor as you can fit in there. It's completely legal. Now, the airline might not approve of you pouring your own drinks, but it makes layovers and hanging out in the terminal much more easy. Edit. So this blew up. I definitely don't want anyone to break the law. All I was saying is that it's a thing, and you can go through the TSA just fine with your own booze. Just be smart about it. Also, I fixed the. Story 58. Mark Twain famously once said, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so." For instance, carrots are good for improving night vision. Fact. During World War II, the British didn't want the Germans to know they had secret radar technology. So they spread propaganda saying that the good eyesight of their pilots was due to carrots, and everyone believed it. Story 59. Coconut milk is not the liquid inside the coconut. That's coconut water. Coconut milk comes from the white flesh inside. The white flesh is pulped or diced and left to soak in warm water. This pulp is then squeezed through a cloth, giving you the milk. Edit. Typo. Pulled. Pulped. Story 60. On the back of an ice scraper, there are teeth to grind through thick ice. Your windshield will not crack if you press too hard, unless it was already damaged. In fact, the glass is curved and should resist getting hit by a bird at 120 kilometers. Cracked windshields do happen from pouring boiling water on them. Lukewarm is all you need. Modern gasoline-powered cars do not need to idle before driving. This myth comes from old cars that did need to warm up, but still holds true for diesels in extremely low temperatures. You can scrape the ice off of the outside of your rear window. The wires of the heating element are attached to the inside. Edit. Regarding the don't idle before driving. If it is under -20 C outside, you should idle it while you scrape off the windows. Story 61. Someone had to invent the concept of zero. Seeing 1, 2, 3, etc. of something made sense for millennia. Not nothing. There is evidence from a few centuries BCE, if I recall correctly, of Mesopotamians using something like 0, not the number though. In the Western Hemisphere, a few centuries CE, evidence has been found of another 0-like thing. Still not the number we know today. No, it wasn't until the Indians in the 8th century started playing with it that the world got the number 0 we use today. I have seen the name Al-Khwarizmi attached to this version the most, though I am sure it was him and a group that fully developed it together. Newton, Leibniz, Descartes, and a bunch of others developed it further with calculus and the like. Answer. We, edit, we as in humans in general, knew about 0 long ago. Indian mathematicians found a system to represent a numerical quantity using only 9 symbols, and elevated 0 from being a null indicator to a place value holder. This opened up the floodgates of mathematical experimentation. Already, Indian mathematicians were used to casually dealing with numbers in millions and billions, and the new number system was a godsend. The first recorded instance of the use of 0 as a legit number is to record the number of flowers yielded by a temple garden for daily ritual use. I love how mundane this reference is. Story 62. That meme on Facebook that says your adult content star name is the name of your first pet and the street you grew up on was put out so that hundreds of gullible teenagers would post the answers to their bank security questions. Edit. Based on the several hundred comments challenging this statement and my honor, it appears I was not clear enough. This was not the first use of the joke. It predates the internet. This and memes like this, however, are distributed on FB to get people to reveal personal information about themselves. FB is currently filled with people revealing the answers to all of their security questions, thanks to memes like this. Just because it's an old joke doesn't mean nefarious individuals can't use it to take advantage of unsuspecting people. Story 63. Because blue eyes are a recessive gene, the first person with the blue eye gene didn't have blue eyes. In fact, the first person with blue eyes was probably the child of two people who had both descended from that person with the recessive blue eye gene. Edit. So turns out eye color is more complicated than just recessive genes. The core concept is unchanged, but take a look at some of the replies for some interesting gene knowledge. Answer. Because blue eyes are a recessive gene. Aren't blue eyes a failure of a gene to express or be passed on? There's no blue eye gene. There's genes for the other colors, and blue eyes is what you get if they don't work. X200B. Edit. Study. Demonstrating two blue eyes parents can have non-blue-eyed children, which states outright it is not the result of a recessive gene on a single allele. Story 64. Our grandkids are going to have HD videos and pictures of us in our teens. Little bit of a mind blow if you ask me. I wish I could see a bunch of videos of my dad my age. Edit. Hey guys, I feel like we are forgetting crucial facts here as to whether I'm being optimistic in keeping those pictures long-term or not. We have social media platforms of multiple variants that we constantly post to share with our friends. Not to mention, we have online database like iCloud and Google Drive storing every photo we take. That coupled with how convenient it is for this generation to take and have access to HD photos makes the point that our kids are going to really see us vividly in our youth. It's cool but terrifying at the same time. Story 65. The 100 Years' War lasted 116 years. A camel hair brush is made of squirrel fur. The Canary Islands in the Atlantic are named after dogs. King George VI's name was Albert. Chinese gooseberries are from New Zealand. The black box on a commercial airplane is orange. Story 66. Our alphabet is actually pictographs based off of the Phoenician language. M is based off of the Phoenician word mem, which means water. If you look at an M, it looks like waves, and they would call each letter by the name of the thing it was designed to resemble. They designed a pictographic alphabet in the same way we give an email over the phone. T as in tree. So when they asked how to spell something, the answer would be the same as me responding. Water, sun, mountain, wheat, stream, water. Story 67. There is no mention that the fruit from the Garden of Eden was an apple. Most biblical scholars think it was a fig. Also, Lucifer, Satan, and the morning star are not synonymous in the Bible. They were later conflated in literature such as Dante's Inferno. Story 68. Cats aren't necessarily lazy. They just sleep more than a human does. But some cats being assholes have no excuse. Edit. Alright, I fixed the apostrophe. Also, I meant some cats being assholes. I know not all of them are assholes. There are some that are very friendly and sweet. I've got two cats. One is an elderly cat that's a stray and she loves us. The other is a male small cat that bites and yells all the time, but that's BC he hasn't been neutered yet. Story 69. In light of the coronavirus outbreak, you do not get sick from being cold, wet, sleeping with a fan on you, leaving the window open, or the phase of the moon. You can only catch a virus from other people depositing the virus in the air you breathe, coughing, sneezing, or the objects you touch and then rub into your face holes. The only defense from a virus is to avoid, remove, wash, and/or eliminate adult beverage sanitizer. Surgical face masks do not protect you from viruses. Hello, China. They are splash barriers. My understanding is that only 95 or full gas masks can filter the tiny size virus. At this point, if you're worried, maybe get some N95 masks. Don't worry about what your auntie says about your fan, and limit your exposure with carriers. Any experts out there that have 2 cents? Story 70. As for my favorite fact to this point, do you know how candles work? The wick doesn't really burn. The wax burns. The flame melts the wax underneath it, and then the heat draws the liquefied wax up the wick through a form of capillary action. Once it gets close enough to the flame, the liquid wax boils, and then those wax vapors combust to sustain the flame. The wax isn't just there to provide a structure to hold the wick up, nor is it there to slow the flame from burning too quickly. No, the wax is the fuel. The wick just delivers it to the flame. Story 71. An investment gain of 20 isn't as impactful as an investment loss of 20. The latter has greater, negative, impact. Edited to clarify, because I worded it terribly. If you have 100 and have only one change ever, let's say 20 gain or loss, So either 100 to 120 or 100 to 80, it's the same 20 impact, positive or negative. But as time goes on and you have multiple changes to that investment, the percentage loss is more impactful. If you have 100 and you have a 20 loss followed by a 20 gain, you're not back at 100. Instead, you end up with 96. Similarly, if you have 100 and you have a 20 gain followed by a 20 loss, you also end up at 96. To put it on a larger scale, if your retirement savings takes a 30 dip during a recession in year one, you don't fully recover the next year just because your investments report a 30 positive gain for year two. You don't even fully recover if your investments report a 40 positive gain for year two. Story 72. When your electronics get water damaged, turning them on to see if they work ensures that they die as the electricity passes through the wet circuits. Instead, you should wait for about 24 hours to ensure everything is completely dry, and then you should turn it on to check if it still works. Story 73. I don't know any facts that would make people feel stupid, but here are some fun facts. 1. The last smokestack on the RMS Titanic was fake, only put on the ship to make it look more powerful. 2. Canadian money is waterproof and has a scratch and sniff maple leaf. Story 74. And yes, that does predate the car, but a few chickens probably were trampled by horse and carriage. Poor guys. Story 75. Shakespeare wasn't a passive writer. He was an active participant in his stage company, the King's Men, formerly the Lord Chamberlain's Men. He also wrote lines and roles with certain actors in mind, who would play the same type of character almost every time. The character Falstaff was probably written specifically for a certain actor to perform. Will Kemp, for example, was known for his comedic roles, and Richard Burbage for his dramatic characters. Burbage was a pretty famous actor in his day, and also acted in Marlowe's plays. Shakespeare didn't actually write his plays has been a conspiracy theory for hundreds of years now, but there's such an overwhelming amount of evidence that he did, for the most part, that it's almost comical. The full truth is that through recent linguistic analysis, we've found that there is strong evidence that he collaborated on a few of them. We can in fact go through the plays line by line and tell exactly which parts were written by Shakespeare and which parts were written by someone else, by their style, structure, and word choice. The Two Noble Kinsmen, his last play, was co-written with a little-known playwright named John Fletcher, and possibly Christopher Marlowe, 3 years before Shakespeare's passing. This would have been around the time he likely was looking to tutor younger writers. Here's a link if you find this interesting. Story 76. The word theory in non-scientific context is used oppositely in scientific context. Those who don't know what it means in a scientific context are generally more skeptical of science because they think all the theories they hear about are just drawn-out guesses. Story 77. There is no such thing as a poisonous snake. Poison is something that you consume or absorb. You can literally down a shot glass of snake venom and be just fine. Venom must be injected. Snakes, spiders, bees, stingrays, jellyfish, and scorpions are venomous, not poisonous. When I'm teaching classes on local wildlife identification, I tell my kids that if it bites you and you die, that's venom. If you bite it and you die, that's poison. Story 78. Deserts aren't dry because they're hot because they're dry. The lack of clouds allows the sun to beat down full force all day. They're dry because the air got cold rained out on the way there. The hottest climate on Earth is the tropical climate near the equator, where it rains constantly. There are hot deserts and cold deserts like the Gobi Desert, and Antarctica is even considered a desert. Story 79. As you go higher in the atmosphere, you don't actually get hypoxic, oxygen deficiency, because of lack of oxygen. You get hypoxic due to the decrease in pressure the higher into the atmosphere you go. This pressure is needed to actually allow your body to process the oxygen. Oxygen is relatively constant throughout the lower levels of our atmosphere. Story 80. If you have a length you're trying to divide into equal parts, measure from one end diagonally until the opposite end lines up on an imaginary line perpendicular to the piece at the other end. Find a number divisible by the number of parts you want and line that up to find your other points along the piece. So if you have a 37-38 board you want cut in 5 pieces, measure diagonally from one end to where 40 on your tape lines up with the other end. Then mark where 8, 16, 24, and 32 line up on the piece, and voila. Story 81. That you rarely see yourself from a non-mirrored perspective. One of the reasons people always think that only they themselves look bad in a photo is because we are all so used to looking at a mirror reflection of ourselves. Pictures are taken from the perspective of another person, aka unmirrored. So when we finally see ourselves in a picture, it's the us that everyone else sees, which is off-putting only to us. Story 82. The reason smokers get cancer is because natural radioactive isotopes of lead and polonium are pulled into the plants from the soil into its tissues while it grows and accumulate. These mostly alpha-emitting particles are usually harmless because they can't penetrate your skin. But when you inhale or ingest them, the radiation is absorbed by cells inside the body, usually in the lungs. If one particle emits radiation and it hits a cell at the moment it's dividing, at just the right angle, the new copy will now be a cancer. Smokers are exposed to more radiation in a year than any other group of people on Earth. An average smoker receives orders of magnitude more radiation than astronauts, X-ray technicians, nuclear reactor workers, and people who handle nuclear material and reprocessing and nuclear weapons combined. These radioactive metals are of little to no use in the body and don't have good metabolic pathways to leave. So even when you quit smoking, they sit around in your tissue for months and years, slowly irradiating nearby cells the entire time. Also, every banana you eat contains a few grams of potassium-60. About 15 atoms per second will decay, releasing radiation into your body. This dose is actually a formal unit, now known as the banana equivalent dose, BED. Answer: it's a reason, not the only reason, or even the main reason. A number of the byproducts of combustion are directly carcinogenic and mutagenic in and of themselves, not to mention the unstable free radicals found in the gas phase. All of the above cause DNA damage, even if the tobacco was born in a totally heavy metal-free environment. If one particle emits radiation and it hits a cell at the moment it's dividing at just the right angle, the new copy will now be a cancer. It's a useful lie to children, but no, it doesn't quite work like that. Cancer is the result of multiple mutations accumulating in a cell line over time, not just a single random lucky hit during mitosis. Story 83. Well, this is more intended towards whatever cocksucker management fuckhead at Amazon decided to force drivers to use this fudge ridiculous e-driving mentor app that monitors our driving and takes away points if we reverse too many times in a day, among other things. But deducting points when I reverse is fudge ridiculous because these vans are huge and the streets in Anaheim, Garden Grove, Stanton, and the surrounding areas are not huge. And so unless you want me driving on people's lawns to turn around or going through walls to get back to a main road from these shoot little side streets, I'm going to need to do some three-point turns throughout the day. Hell, I might even have to park in a parking lot with spots you can't pull through in. Or even maybe have to parallel park so I'm not blocking the insane amount of traffic zipping by. And both of those things require me to reverse. Story 84. I don't know if this is a little-known fact, but maybe it just isn't as common or obvious for everyone. When calculating the tip to add to a check, start with finding 10 of the to-check total by moving the decimal one place to the left. Then double that number to get 20. You can subtract from there if you want. So if you go out to eat and the total is 38. 47. Move the decimal to the left by one place and you get 3. 85 for 10. I always round up there just to keep it easy. Then double that to get 7. 70 for 20, and so on. Story 85. You cannot see the Great Wall of China from space. The width of the wall at its widest point is 54. A 4-lane highway in the U.S. with a 10 median would be 58 wide. Country medians are 50-60, not even counting the lanes. So if you can't see a 4-lane highway from space, you're not going to see the Great Wall either. Story 86. If you lost most of your body heat through your head, someone wearing coats, thick pants, and gloves wouldn't be as warm as someone buck naked, but with a well-insulated hat. Your head isn't a magical radiator. You just lose body heat through whatever isn't insulated. If you bundle everything up but your head, that means you will lose body heat through your head. Story 87. Without the cuticle, eggs must be refrigerated to combat bacterial infection from inside. In Europe, it's illegal to wash eggs, and instead, farms vaccinate chickens against salmonella. With the cuticle intact, refrigeration could cause mildew growth and contamination. In the United States, fresh, commercially produced eggs need to be refrigerated to minimize your risk of food poisoning. Story 88. My 15-year-old had a tonsillectomy recently. When she was coming out of the anesthesia, Her filter no longer existed, so my introvert was all about sharing her knowledge. Did you know that Spain had a higher unemployment rate than the US during the Great Depression? The octopus has blue blood and 3 hearts. Did you know a group of cats is called a clouder? What's your favorite number? 3. 333. You're only half evil. We need to get a duck and name it Possum. Scoliosis. I can say scoliosis. If you're sitting at 180 in your seat with your seatbelt on, would you go forward or backwards? My uvula has dirt on it. If a takedown and kids got together, do you think the goats would try to eat the crows? Why do people say a school of fish instead of just a school? Is there a school of flies? No. Story 89. The modern keyboard layout is designed to make you type slower. When typewriters were a new thing, they had did the obvious thing and put the most used letters on the home row. Result? People typed too fast and got the hammers tangled. You're not an idiot. Learning to type fast is hard. It's supposed to be. Story 90. I don't know how well known unknown it is, but a tree doesn't get all that mass that makes it up out of the soil. Something like 95% of a tree's mass is made of carbon pulled directly out of the air in the form of carbon dioxide. I guess most people understand the idea conceptually of photosynthesis and carbon fixation, but I don't think many people really realize that when looking at a massive tree, especially something like a redwood. Story 91. The term begs the question is very rarely used correctly. It's a logical fallacy and does not mean, so this raises the question, and instead refers to the act of asserting an unproven conclusion into a question, i.e., Senator Warren. What did you think when Senator Sanders said a woman couldn't be president?
This is an example of begging the question because in that moment, it was not concluded that Senator Sanders had in fact made that claim.
And this is just an example. It's not meant to start a discussion about what happened at the debates, though Sanders was railroaded with that bullshit logical fallacy question begging, if you ask me. Answer: not quite. What you described is described as a complex question fallacy, or loaded question. Begging the question is trying to support a claim with an argument that relies on the same claim being true. I'm essentially saying, you shouldn't vote for her because you shouldn't vote for her, obfuscating my circular reasoning by rewording the same premise in the latter half and throwing a because in the middle. Story 92. There's a little lever on the side of the steering wheel in your car that if maneuvered up or down will activate a device that's called a turn signal, indicating to other drivers on the road that you are preparing to make a turn or to move into another lane. Story 93. Cold water cleans just as well as warm water does. When using modern detergent, clothes will be equally clean whether warm or cold water is used. There is one major difference. Warm water uses much more energy. About 75% of the energy used for a load of laundry comes from warming the water. Answer: you should edit the comment to say cold water cleans clothes just as well as hot water with modern machines and detergents. Hot water dissolves more solids than cold water. Even things that are considered insolvent have significantly higher solvency with 50 seawater versus 20 seawater. This is why it's often used for cleaning on commercial and industrial scales. Story 94. The Mayan calendar didn't predict the end of the world. It was literally just where they left off, and the end of it would have been the end of a large unit of time. Think that, had the Mayans still been a major, thriving civilization in 2012, it would have been a similar event to you celebrating New Year's Day in the year 2000. Story 95. Jesus wasn't born on December 25th. In fact, nobody knows exactly when he was born. The date was stolen from the pagans, just like a lot of other things. The more you look into it, the more you realize so much is made up or taken from previous religious groups. Nobody cares about the truth because they enjoy Christmas and the idea too much. Story 96. Doesn't make everyone feel stupid, just a cool fact. The Bluetooth symbol isn't just a random symbol. It's the rune of a Viking king called Harald Bluetooth. Bluetooth is called Bluetooth based on an analogy that Bluetooth technology would unite devices the way Harald Bluetooth united the tribes of Denmark into a single kingdom. Story 97. Psychotic and psychopathic are two completely different things. A psychopath is a person who, among other things, has no empathy or guilt. They do not have the natural barriers to harming others. Serial killers are often psychopaths. Psychotic refers to a symptom called psychosis, which is characterized by hallucinations and delusions. It is the main symptom of schizophrenia. Bonus fact: antisocial in the mental health profession refers not to being a loner or not wanting to be around other people. It refers to not caring about other people and being able to harm others without remorse. Psychopaths would be diagnosable with antisocial personality disorder, though not all people with ASPD are psychopaths. Edit spelling. Story 98. I've posted this before, but many refrigerators and clothes dryers have reversible doors. You can attach them so it opens right to left or left to right, depending on what fits your room best. Our laundry porch is very narrow, and the dryer opened a stupid direction for the first handful of years we lived there. Eventually, I noticed the spots that allow for the door to be switched. Story 99. Her name isn't Joan of Arc, it's simply Jeanne d'Arc. It was assumed by English speakers that the d'Arc was a contraction of d'Arc, which in French would be of arc, just like Palme d'Or means palm of gold. But there is no Arc family or location in France. Her name might as well be just spelled d'Arc. See, Joan of Arc did not come from a place called Arc, but was born and raised in the village of Domremy, in what was then the northeastern frontier of the Kingdom of France. 1. In the English language, her first name has been repeated as Joan since the 15th century, because that was the only English equivalent for the feminine form of John during her lifetime. Her surviving signatures are all spelled Jehan without surname. In French, her name is today always rendered as Jeanne d'Arc, reflecting the modern spelling of her first name. The surname of Arc is a translation of d'Arc, which itself is a 19th century French approximation of her father's name. Apostrophes were never used in 15th century French surnames, which sometimes leads to confusion between place names and other names that begin with the letter D. Story 100. That you can, but is at your own risk to eat raw meats and such. In the States, you will notice places having a little sign that roughly states something about undercooked foods. This is so they are allowed to serve those items legally like that. They'd get fine lawsuits if someone gets sick from eating items like that. But in general, loads of things you can get away with eating it raw to semi-raw. Only thing I highly do not recommend this is with chicken and other bird-related meats. Those are still highly vulnerable to many illnesses and whatnot if left undercooked raw. Story 101. Glass is not a slow-moving liquid. People are often taught it is, and the proof given is that old windows are slightly thicker at the bottom. That is not true. If it was, old glassware would be puddles, and antique glassware would not exist. Old telescopes not work, but Galileo's telescope is still in working order. The reason old windows are slightly wider at the bottom is because old windows were not made evenly, and it just made sense to be the wide part at the bottom. End of story. Story 102. To decimate means to eradicate every tenth of whatever it is you're eradicating. It does not mean to entirely destroy something. It came from Roman times. If the troops were subordinate or messed up in some way, the general would decimate the troops. So every 10th Roman soldier would step forward and be eliminated in order to teach the remaining troops a lesson. The amount of times I have heard people saying that something was decimated, even on news reports, where clearly the thing was completely destroyed, not that a tenth of it was gone. Story 103. I worked with a guy that would always start complaining out loud about how he didn't feel good or start coughing. The day before he would call in sick. He would dramatize it so when the boss would get the call and say, "Shorty won't be in today, he's sick," we all would say, "Yeah," he said. He wasn't feeling well yesterday. Made it look like he was really sick, but we all knew better. Story 104. Green tea and black tea does not come from different plants. It is the same leaves, with the leaves for black tea being fermented first. I don't know if this is common knowledge or if I was just super ignorant, but I facepalmed hard standing in a tea plantation in Sri Lanka, having just learned this, 28 years old, and thinking, how did I not know that? Story 105. Baby on board signs on cars are not meant to be stickers or decals, with some delusion that other cars around you are going to drive any differently. It is meant to be a sign that is placed on the car only when a baby truly is in the car, so that emergency first responders know to look for one and act accordingly in the event of an accident. Story 106. Antisocial means harmful, destructive, and without empathy or remorse, as per DSM-5, and is the actual term used for the common misnomer, socio or psychopath. Up until 18 years, this same disorder is given the term conduct disorder. Being overly introverted or avoidant, uninterested in relationships, or interpersonal contact is actually called schizoid personality disorder and not antisocial. Story 107. If you add all the numbers together until you get a single digit after multiplying a number by 9, you will always get 9 at the end. Doesn't matter how big or small the number is you're multiplying by 9. For example, 29, 18 and 1 plus 8 equals 9. Another example, 1,239, 107 and 1, plus 1 plus 0 plus 7 equals 9. You can do it on a calculator to see and play around with. It was amazing to me when I figured this out. Story 108. If you turn on a fan in your room, you are not cooling the air. You are helping water evaporate off your skin quicker, which cools your body temperature. However, my wife, who turns on the ceiling fan and then covers herself with blankets, doesn't understand this. Married 30 years. Tom. Story 109. The symbol on your power buttons on your electronics is a 0 and a 1 crossed over, or the 1 inside the 0. This is because a 0 and 1 are literally on-off in binary. If the 1 is fully in the circle, it means it's a directly on-off switch. If the 1 is breaking through the top, it means there is a standby or sleep mode. Story 110. Winter doesn't happen. Because the Earth is farther away from the Sun, it's in orbit. So in that case, we'd have 2 winters if it was oval-shaped enough for that to matter. It's the tilt of the Earth that causes the Sun's rays to hit more obliquely. That causes winter. Story 111. There is a psychological effect that ensures your confidence is inversely proportionate to your ability. So if you have 0 skill at fencing, with a rapier or épée not selling knocked-off clobber, you'll have more confidence in your ability than that fella from Iron Maiden, who was world champion. Story 112. United States numbered highway system routes with odd numbers run north-south. Routes with even numbers run east-west. For north-south routes, the lowest numbers are in the west. For east-west routes, the lowest numbers are in the south. Beltways around a city or spur routes carry a 3-digit number. Story 113. Many consonants in any spoken language are just voiced and unvoiced versions of themselves, meaning you make the same shape with your mouth, but one uses your vocal folds and the other does not. For instance, the sound z is just a voiced version of the sound s. Dame goes for B, voiced, and P, unvoiced, D, voiced, and T, unvoiced, and V, voiced, and F, unvoiced, G, voiced, and K, unvoiced, and so on. Story 114. Maybe not obvious, but I'm a nerd, and I've gotten some wows with this. There are an infinite number of prime numbers, so there is no largest prime. This means that no matter how big a number you pick, there is always a number that is bigger than that, and it is only divisible by 1 and itself. Bonus. Modern cryptography, think secure internet connections, are based on the multiplication of extremely large prime numbers, or more specifically, really, really large semi-prime numbers, meaning the only divisors are 1 itself and the 2 prime numbers. Edit. TLDR. Infinite prime numbers. Answer. The cryptography thing is really interesting because it means that no system knows your password outside of your own, just the number it corresponds to. Say your PW is AB, example, which correspond to 7 and 13 in an encryption, which are then multiplied together and sent to a server. Figuring out the combination of numbers that multiply to make 91 takes longer than the calculation. But the receiving server only gets 91. So your password doesn't actually go anywhere, and the server doesn't know it either. In real-world stuff, these numbers are massive, but this is an example. Story 115. From food or water. But if you're fasting, you sure won't be running fast. Story 116. So broccoli, cabbage, collard greens, kale, cauliflower, and Brussels sprouts all seem pretty different, except maybe broccoli and cauliflower. It's commonly pointed out that they're all closely related, but this isn't fully true. They're not just related, they're different cultivars of the same species, Brassica oleracea. The wild form probably resembled kale, but as humans cultivated it and found different ways to cook and eat it, they selected for different traits, causing the wide variations in appearance. Also, they're closely related to mustard. Story 117. This one is mostly little known because lots of people don't work food service. But real people have to wash your dishes before they get put into the actual dishwasher. I had a fellow student at my uni ask me, "Are there people back there?"